This is the TTArtisan 75mm f2.0 lens for full frame cameras, and it only costs $178. But is it any good? Let's find out. Before we get started, I do have to say that TTArtisan did send me this lens for free, but they have not sponsored this video and they have not paid me to give them a positive review. So as always with videos like this, I'll do my absolute best to give you guys my honest opinions. The first thing that I need to point out is that this lens is currently selling for $178 US. So under $200 for a full frame f2.0 autofocus lens is crazy. The lens has a black anodized all metal construction. It comes with your front lens cap, a lens hood, and this very interesting rear lens cap that has an integrated USB-C port for firmware updates. So be sure to not lose this cap or else you won't be able to do your firmware updates. There's only one control on this entire lens, and it's this clicked aperture ring. There's no control to be able to declick it or to lock this aperture ring, so be aware of that. There's no AF/MF switch. There's no aperture ring lock. There is also no weather sealing on this lens. The lens is fairly small and compact. The length comes in at 74 millimeters. The diameter comes in at 67 millimeters, and it weighs just 328 grams. It has threads for a front filter, and those are 62 millimeter front filter threads, which is a little odd of a filter size, but it's not a deal breaker. And this is how it looks on a Sony a7 IV. You can see it's pretty small, pretty compact. It feels very well balanced, and this lens has a good enough weight to it that it feels quality, but it doesn't feel heavy. It still feels really well balanced. Okay, so let's talk about autofocus performance. So this lens features STM or stepper focusing motors, which are typically slower than the lightning fast linear motors that you'll find in Sony lenses. And my test pretty much confirmed that when I was shooting fast moving subjects with this, the autofocus performance just couldn't keep up. So I wouldn't recommend this lens if you're a sports or action photographer. But when I did use this lens for portrait settings or street photography or just everyday carry kind of shooting, it worked really, really well. I didn't have any issues with the autofocus. The focusing motors themselves are very quiet, but they're not completely silent. Like if I was shooting in my studio right now, I would be able to hear the motors, but you have to really know what you're listening for. When I'm out and about in the streets or everyday carry, I don't notice the focusing motor noise at all. I found this lens to be surprisingly sharp and contrasty, especially for the price point. I did notice that there was a slight drop off in sharpness as you get to the edges of the frame. But interestingly, now I don't know if this was just with my copy of the lens, but that pretty much held true even as you stop down the lens. And what I found even more interesting was that at f2, the edges of the frame looked better than even when I got to f8. And that's not typical. I don't think I've ever seen that in another lens, but at least that's how my copy behaves. So I don't have any problem shooting wide open at f2 with this lens. It looked great. But there was a good amount of vignetting at f2.0, so be aware of that. I personally don't mind the vignetting because I tend to add vignetting in post anyway, but for all you out there who don't like it, be aware. Another thing that really surprised me with this lens was how well it handled fringing. So I shot a couple different scenarios, like the typical backlit fence, something very high contrast. And I had to try really, really, really hard to find any kind of fringing with this lens, whether it was lateral or longitudinal chromatic aberrations. So I think that anybody shooting and not pixel peeping, I think it's not going to be an issue at all. I don't think you're going to notice much, if any, chromatic aberrations with this lens, which is kind of wild considering that it's less than $200. Another thing that really, really surprised me with this lens was how good the bokeh looked. Again, for the price point, So the bokeh was very smooth looking. There wasn't a lot of onion ringing. There wasn't soap bubble effects. There was minimal cat's eyeing out on the edges of the frame, but as Gerald has shown, even $100,000 RE primes have cat's eyeing, so it's to be expected. One thing to note is that there's not a lot of character with it. I'd say they're going for more of like a clinically good bokeh, probably along the lines of like a G Master type of look, and that's good. That's fine. A lot of people like that look. But if you don't, I just wanted to call it out. If you're looking for something with a little more character, this is probably not it. It rendered the specular highlights really, really nice. I'll put up some example photos right now. And images with more of a natural background, it blurs them really nicely, even the hard edges. Everything looks, I hate to use that word, but everyone says creamy. It does look a little creamy, very nice and dreamy. So yeah, the bokeh on this is surprisingly good. Okay, so the next thing I looked at are lens flares. Now, I think from a technical point of view, this lens doesn't do that good of a job of preventing lens flares, but I think it handles them really well. Now, what I mean by that is that, like, take a G Master lens, for example. I think that those lenses prevent lens flares really well, but when you actually do get a lens flare with a G Master, sometimes it looks really odd. Like, I think you guys will know what I'm talking about. You'll see like this little green dot or a green shape kind of appearing in and out of a frame. And to me, that looks really odd. Whereas this lens, yes, it doesn't prevent the flaring as good as a G Master, but when it does flare, I feel like this handles the flare better in terms of it looks a little more natural and a little more cinematic. So I actually like the way the flare renders, and I'm okay with flares. I actually like flares, so I might be an outlier, but I don't have a problem with it. The next thing I looked at was the manual focus characteristics of this lens. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that this lens does not have an AF/MF switch, and I was super concerned about that before I started using the lens because I always use that switch on my other lenses. But I have to be honest, after I've tested the manual focus on this lens, I actually don't care that it doesn't have that switch because I will never use manual focus on this lens. And there's one big reason why, and that is that, well, while the ring actually feels good, the dampening feels good, and the throw is fairly short and it's linear, the problem is that I don't think that the motors that are driving the focusing elements in there have enough resolution. So what happens is as you turn the ring, I could actually see my peaking just jumping like this, like it was a stair step function. And I was like, that is so weird. So you can imagine if you're doing macro or, just anything where you need to be very accurate with your focus, you're going to have a really hard time because it's not like this infinite continually focusing thing. It's like you can only focus by certain steps. And it was actually pretty odd. I don't know if I've ever experienced that with another lens. So that's why for me, I will probably never ever manual focus with this. So now I don't actually care if there's that AF/MF switch on there, unfortunately. Oh, and before we move away from focusing, I do want to say that this lens also has a fair amount of focus breathing. Actually, it has a lot of focus breathing. So be aware of that if you do want to use this for video, but we'll get into that later. So before I give you guys my final thoughts, let's take a quick look at some sample gallery images, just so you guys have a feel for what this lens can do. All right, let's sum things up. So, overall, I think that the construction of this lens is really good. I love the all metal body. The black anodizing looks really good. I do think that the silkscreen that they put here for the aperture markings could be aligned a little better. It drives my OCD a little crazy that it doesn't line up perfectly. Staying on the aperture ring, I do wish that the detents were a little stronger, especially going from A to the actual aperture numbers, because I'm constantly knocking it out of A unintentionally. So I don't like that, especially because there's not an aperture ring lock switch. The other thing I don't like is this lens hood. It's kind of a small deal, but it doesn't go on really well. And once you get it on, it kind of feels like you're gonna break it. I don't know. I don't know why it's so hard to get lens hoods right, but yeah, it just doesn't feel good. This rear lens cap, it's a little weird that the USB-C port is on this lens cap. I mean, I guess I know why they did it, probably because it's easier to replace this than it is to replace this mount or the whole lens. So I understand why they did it, but I think there's a really high chance that I'm going to lose this thing. So I'm not a fan of that. The 62mm front filter thread, I do wish that that was a more common thread size, like a 67. That would be cool. I think my biggest complaint is probably the manual focus, stepping issue that I talked about a little earlier. I like to manual focus a lot. I like to shoot a lot of video. So that's not great. But all that being said, for a lens that costs $178, I think if you're a photographer, especially portraits, street, or you're just looking for a nice everyday carry lens, I think this lens will be fantastic for those purposes. The autofocus speed is plenty fast for those scenarios. This lens is sharp, contrasty. The bokeh looks really good. So I think for beginning photographers, or even if you're a seasoned photographer, but you're on a really tight budget, I think this is a really good option. Oh, and I didn't mention that this lens, this is the E-mount version, but this lens is also available for Nikon Z-mount, and it's also available in L-mount. So that's really cool. Now, while this lens is good for a particular set of photographers, I don't think that I would recommend this if you shoot a lot of video. The autofocus speed, I don't think it's fast enough to reliably track a moving subject. And the manual focus issues that I talked about earlier, I think that would make me really uncomfortable in being able to really nail focus. And on top of that, it does have a good amount of focus breathing, and you can't take advantage of Sony's focus breathing compensation because it's not a Sony lens. So that's just another reason why I probably would not use this lens for video. All right, well, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope the video was useful. If I left anything out, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to drop a comment down below and let me know. I'll do my best to answer each and every one of them. If this is your first time here, my name is Matt, and I make videos about photography, video, gear, do reviews, vlogs, all that stuff. So if you don't want to miss out on any future content, please consider liking and subscribing because it helps me out a lot. Again, my name is Matt, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.